Please give a very warm welcome to Amber Allen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here, and to Meg for inviting me here. I'm very grateful to be with you learning about these important topics today. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Bundjalung people's land on which we are sitting and learning today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Amber Allen, and I'm a speech pathologist working in the Brisbane region. Early in my career, I developed a passion for understanding how language development is tied to behaviour. It didn't take long to uncover a troubling pattern, that many of the vulnerable children that I was working with were being drawn into the criminal justice system. The harsh reality of this shook me back then, and it continues to shake me now. It hasn't changed. It's startling to realise that language, something that is so fundamental to human connection, can, when impaired, lead to such devastating outcomes. The youth justice system is an emerging field for speech pathologists worldwide. Pamela Snow is a speech pathologist in Australia who's done some incredible research on the topic, and I've included a bunch of references at the end that you can go and read up later if you're interested. This research highlights a significant prevalence of speech, language and communication needs among young people involved with the youth justice system, many of which go undiagnosed. There is also growing evidence linking these communication difficulties to offending behaviour. In Australia, there are very conservative estimates that suggest that up to 52% of young male offenders have undiagnosed developmental language disorder. 90% are considered to be at risk of a language disorder, meaning they have many of the risk factors associated with a diagnosis. They just haven't been assessed. Things like trauma, FASD, autism spectrum disorder, and out-of-home care living situations. These findings underscore the need for specialised speech pathology involvement in the youth justice system. However, speech pathology engagement in this field is relatively new, primarily due to a lack of awareness and funding. A positive correlation has been demonstrated between the severity of a developmental language disorder and the severity of offences committed by young people. And developmental language disorder has been shown to be a strong predictor of recidivism above all other known risk factors. That's a wild statistic. What we know is that the current model of detention is failing significantly. We need to ensure that every child in the justice system has access to speech pathology services, because these services can mean the difference between rehabilitation and reoffending. I want you to imagine something simple yet profoundly isolating. Imagine being a child who cannot ask a new friend or carer for their contact details because you know you won't be able to write them down, knowing you may never see them again. Picture wanting to call someone from your phone but not knowing how to navigate the contact list because the words blur together. Being handed information leaflets for services that could change your life, but you can't read it or understand what they say. Worst of all, imagine needing to ask for help but not knowing how because your language disorder has robbed you of the words. You only have the words. You do have words, which is why no one's picked this up before, but the only words you have are the words that have been taught to you, or the words modelled around you, the same words that are often used to protect those who have caused harm or influenced you. You may become easy to manipulate by older peers and adults who take advantage of your inability to express what is really going on. These struggles often go unnoticed by the people around them because on the surface they can speak. So we assume that they understand what they're saying and the meaning behind what they're saying. This compounds their frustration, often leading to behavioural problems that the system misinterprets as rebellion, defiance, ODD, conduct disorder. Language disorders make it difficult for individuals to understand legal proceedings, participate in rehab programs, or even advocate for themselves. When a child can't communicate effectively or a person. Their behaviour is often misinterpreted as defiance, leading to harsher penalties and deeper involvement in the justice system. Now imagine you're one of these children being questioned about a crime you've committed. You don't understand what you're being accused of, the consequences involved, the legal terms being thrown at you. You just want it all to stop. You may have co-occurring diagnoses like ADHD. You just want to get out. Nobody would guess that you're not meaning what you're saying, though, because you can cuss like a pirate and you can tell people where to go as a way of asserting yourself and gaining some control over the conversation. You use the words you have. You lack the pragmatic language skills to adapt your body language, tone of voice, and vocabulary to the situation. You don't know to talk in the courtroom differently to how you talk to your mob back home. You may interact with the world from an aggressive standing point because this is all you know. Everything is overwhelming and confusing. We need to ensure that every step of the youth justice system considers multidisciplinary input, from the fit to plea process to rehabilitation planning and delivery, ensuring that every child has equitable access to understanding the legal process, the consequences they face, and an effective prevention program. This issue is even more pronounced among Indigenous Australian children who face additional cultural and linguistic barriers. Indigenous youth are 29 times more likely to be incarcerated than their non-Indigenous peers, reflecting the systemic inequities that permeate our society. Speech pathologists play an important role across many settings, including all stages of the youth justice system. The key is early identification and support so that vulnerable young children with limited language skills are not being passed through every stage of this process with no support or understanding. Studies and economic modelling have demonstrated that costs associated with employing speech pathologists across the youth justice system are considerably less than those incurred by the incarceration of vulnerable young offenders, legal and health interventions and recidivism. Speech pathology is considered essential within the general community health context, begging the question as to why these essential services don't apply within the youth justice system for some of the most vulnerable individuals in our society. I found this nifty quote when I was looking up, "Do we matter?" The youth justice system is a language-rich environment involving legal and formal language in both written and verbal formats. It's scary. It's a scary place to be in, and it's scary when you don't understand what's going on. Each state has its own legislation, policies and practices, but the general processes are similar. Substantial demands are placed on young offenders' speech, language and communication abilities during every step of their journey throughout the system. Comprehension of complex language is required in both community and custodial settings, including advice of the right to remain silent, sentencing, bail conditions, custodial facility rules, and educational programs such as anger management and substance abuse rehabilitation programs. Let me share the story of a 14-year-old boy that I recently worked with who is in the care of the state. He struggled not only with literacy but also with expressing his needs and feelings. He could speak, so nobody knew he had a language disorder. He got to 14 without a speech or language assessment. He did have co-occurring diagnoses, ADHD, ASD, conduct disorder, all of the high risk factors that should mark a speech pathology referral, but it just wasn't picked up. When we carefully assessed his language skills, it became clear that this young man had been suffering with a severe language disorder his whole life. His inability to communicate often led to very aggressive behaviours as he tried to make sense of the world around him and have his needs met. He'd been expelled from all of the local high schools by the end of grade 7. He refused to do any work, often tearing it up. He would often abscond from the class. All of his therapists would see him once and never again. His carers, who had the best of intentions in his residential care home, introduced a written schedule to help him understand his daily routine. But there was a problem because nobody knew that he couldn't read it. He would really excitedly show me this schedule and ask me to read to him what's happening the next day. What am I having for dinner tomorrow? Who's coming to see me on the weekend? When's Vicky coming back? So he wanted to engage with it. The intent was there and it was positive intent, but he just couldn't read it. And he was ashamed to say that. So he didn't ask anyone else for help. He only asked me because I was there to help him read. This boy lived in constant anxiety, not knowing what was happening each day, who was coming to visit, where he was going. And when we identified this gap and introduced visual aids to his schedule instead of text, everything changed. Suddenly he could anticipate his daily activities, reducing his anxiety. He knew he was coming. He loved food. He was very food motivated. So that was a really good positive reinforcement opportunity throughout the day to look forward, something to look forward to. We worked on language skills in a very functional way, teaching him to use his words more than his hands to have his needs met. And that worked really effectively. He did absolutely ace at modelling and short phrases, and he wanted to learn, he wanted to impress, he wanted to do the right thing. And when he had that opportunity, he took it with both hands, and it was very impressive. Over time, his aggression decreased and he began to engage more meaningfully with his carers, peers and education. It wasn't just about understanding and using words, it was about giving him control over his world. Language is control. A lack of language is a lack of control. Now he can navigate the contacts list in his phone to speak to people he cares about or call me to ask to send him more schoolwork. He can send a message to his friends and maintain contact with these friends no matter where he is moved to. He's moved fairly often. And he has a sense of pride showing off the schoolwork he can now complete to almost everybody who comes to visit. It wasn't just about language, it was about a need for human connection and a sense of purpose. Language was just the key that he needed to access this. Everyone who knows him says that he's a different child. The stakeholder meetings have gone from casual comments like there's only one place he's going to end up to how impressed everyone is with how much he wants to learn, how he's attentive to all of his schoolwork now. It's not that shocking, it's just language. So I've put together 5 actionable tasks that we can work towards to help prevent vulnerable young youth from ending up in the criminal justice system unnecessarily. Firstly, introducing mandatory language assessments for all children identified as at risk. So those in state care, Indigenous children, those with behavioural difficulties, those involved in the youth justice system. These are all high risk factors for language disorders. Early detection can lead to timely interventions, reducing communication-related frustrations that often escalate into behavioural issues. I developed a behaviour clinic about 8 years ago in my multidisciplinary private practice because I realised how so many of our behaviour referrals that were coming through, and we had the luxury of being a multidis clinic, so we had OTs and speech pathologists working together. Usually it would go to the psychologist or the OT for the initial assessment, but because we were working as a team, we could bounce ideas off each other. And realising that so many of our behaviour referrals, it all came down to language. It really kind of shaped the way that we presented this program or used this program moving forward. We changed everything within the first 6 months. I remember seeing a little boy in school. He had a referral for absconsion every day. And when I sat down and spoke to him in a way that he could understand and developed a rapport so that he could open up with me, I asked him why he was absconding, and he said he was running off to Coles to get the free fruit at lunchtime to bring back for his little brother who'd just started kindergarten. But no one had asked him. They refer them for negative behaviours, they're not following the rules, but they're not respected enough or understood enough, or there's not enough neuroaffirming training in schools for people to know how to ask the right questions. That was a pretty simple solution for that one. Action plan number 2, providing professional development training for local law enforcement agencies. This would include training in de-escalation techniques and communication strategies tailored to individuals with language difficulties. Law enforcement officers are often the first person to come in contact with vulnerable youth who may end up in the criminal justice system. So having an awareness of language disorders, having an awareness of how to identify that and how to adjust your communication style based on whether you may or may not suspect that, that's absolutely critical. Fostering cultural competency training for healthcare professionals, teachers, solicitors, police officers, all of the touch points where children who are in high-risk situations, carers in out-of-home care situations have a huge role in this. You see these children regularly, you know these children well, you are the perfect candidate to identify a potential language disorder and get them the help that they need. This will also foster trust between vulnerable communities and service providers, reducing the likelihood of miscommunication and subsequent criminal justice involvement. We also need to create accessible client education materials for children, family and caregivers. So education materials around how to identify language disorders, how to get the help that you may need, but also making sure that we have easy English leaflets with visual aids for every step of the youth justice process to maximise understanding as much as possible. Children should be involved in this process and not standing by while this happens to them. And lastly, establishing community outreach programs to promote health literacy and language development. So this can play a significant role in prevention by engaging families before children experience serious difficulties. Programs focused on improving health and language literacy can also create opportunities for early referrals to speech pathology services. By addressing language and communication barriers early, fostering cultural understanding and creating supportive educational environments, we can help vulnerable children build the skills they need to succeed and prevent their involvement in the criminal justice system. These actions are vital steps in ensuring every child has the chance to thrive and avoid the detrimental cycle of incarceration. It's very small text, but I've included a bunch of references in case you're interested around language development and the youth justice system specifically. So I think these slides will be available after the conference, and if you're interested you can look them up or send me an email and I'd be happy to shoot them through. Thank you.